And now we finish the introduction. Now we'll look into, again, another example of looking at this data at a top level. So we've seen now data at the level of aggregation of one season. But in Prozone, we have data coming back to 1998, I think, in some cases, and some old games from 1965, I think it is. So we can do a lot of longitudinal analysis that are really interesting. So take a look at this one, for example. We're going to be using Liverpool because they have some very interesting trends. So here we have the last 9 seasons average, etc. And you can tell straight away that Liverpool has traditionally been a very counter-attacking team. In some cases, just almost twice as much as the average team, and that is a lot. So that to start with. They are very counter-attacking by nature, if you want. But what's happened in the last 2 seasons is that they've decreased quite a bit on that. So the second season by Brendan Rodgers, that's 13-14, they were 44% on average along the season above the average team. And that made them the most counter-attacking team in the league, as we mentioned before. Now, if you look at the data this season, they're only 5% above that average. And that makes them 10th out of 20. So that's a massive decrease. And it's a decrease in a style that I think is important for Liverpool, as the data is saying. So why has that happened? How can we start to understand that? In case we want to change that, what should we act on? So what we can look is at the players, because the players are the ones that go on the pitch and they actually do the things that we see. So this is Liverpool players last season, 13-14, and these are the 15 players with the most minutes on the pitch. The width of the bar here is proportional to how much they played, simple as that. So you get Mignolet was the most played player, the least from the 15 is Daniel Agger. And the y-axis, you have the distance covered with the ball during counter-attack phases. So that's what we're going to use to measure the involvement of the players during counter-attack phases, okay? So you see there's 2 colors, I hope you see. The darker one means distance carried. So I can advance the ball during a counter-attack by carrying it, by running with it, or I can just pass it and get it to a teammate that is also advancing the ball. So dark blue corresponds to carrying, light blue corresponds to passing. So you see different profiles already. If you look at Henderson, he does most of it through passes. If you look at Sterling, he does more or less 50-50. So he does quite a bit of carrying. So that's the way this works. So this is how it looked like last season. How does it look like this season? So what I've done here is, for players that are still in the team, I've put them next to the previous bar. And for players that are not in the team anymore, so Luis Suarez and John Flanagan, I've put the next player with the most minutes. And the idea here is to look at differences. So we look at Jordan Henderson. He's decreased his distance in counter-attack. We look at Suarez. He's not anymore in the team, so we've put the next player with the most minutes, less contribution to counter-attack. Steven Gerrard, less contribution. Some of them have slightly more, Mignolet and Coutinho, but some of them have a lot less, and this is Sterling. And not only does he have less counter-attack distance per 90 minutes, remember, because I didn't mention, this is per 90 minutes, but he's also playing more, so that means he's a double trouble if you want. He does it less, least often per 90 minutes, and he plays more. So this is the picture that we saw in the other graph, but in terms of the actual people that are making these things happen. And the reason, because this shows you that they're doing something less often, but you still need to know why. My argument here is that they lack a clear reference in the attack, so that if I'm, say, Jordan Henderson and I regain the ball, maybe last season I put my eyes up and I saw Luis Suarez and I say, okay, let's go for it. And I'll just put a pass and maybe I reach him, and that would increase my bar here. But maybe this season I look up and there's no Luis Suarez and Sturridge is injured most of the season, so I say, okay, let's pass it here. And instead of a counter-attack, I do something else, and maybe the increase in maintenance comes from that. So that's our argument here, is that there's been a widespread decrease in the counter-attack distance, and we're going to argue that it's due to an absence of a clear reference in those plays. So then the question is, okay, what can we do then? We go back to last summer. We go back to the summer 2014, and we say, I'm Liverpool, I'm a very counter-attacking team, and I want to keep being that counter-attacking team. But I know that Suarez is going to leave, okay? He's going to leave to Barcelona. And I know for some reason, because someone's told me that Sturridge is going to be injured most of the season. So, okay, let's do something about it, right? So let's look at the market. And I know there's going to be a talk later, a very interesting one actually, about recruitment. So we're going to just touch it a bit here in terms from the focus of the playing style. So basically, we're going to look at strikers. What it said here is basically we're looking at strikers in the 5 top leagues in Europe. So that is England, Italy, France, Germany, and I'm missing one. France, there you go. So those 5 leagues, the other doesn't matter. And we're going to look at attackers because we want to replace bring a new attacker that they can replace these 2 guys. One of them has left, the other one is injured, okay? And the only requirement we're going to put is the candidates we're going to look at, we're going to require them to have played more than 900 minutes in the previous season so that we have a decent sample, or we start to have one, okay? And the main focus here to start with is counter-attack. As we said, we want to be that counter-attacking team, so we want the striker that we bring to be a counter-attacking striker. Okay, so that's what we have here. This plot here shows you two variables. The first one in the x-axis, that's counter-attacking distance per 90 minutes, what we saw before. I've put this here because, as I said, we want a counter-attacking striker. But also in a striker, hopefully what you want is goals per 90 minutes. So I've added this one here. So those are the two variables we're looking at. And these are, again, all the 232 players that satisfy those attacking criteria and more than 900 minutes last season from those 5 leagues. And the size of the sphere is proportional to the minutes they played. So the bigger the size, the bigger the sphere, the more time they played. So let's take a zoom at the part we're already looking at, which is the top right corner, and that's where our 2 players are. So that's Suarez there, that's Sturridge. So that for me is good news, in that we had 2 of the best players in Europe in that season. That's great. The bad news is we have to replace them. And obviously, the closer you get to that corner, the more money you have to put in the table. But let's look at that outside of that. So we have these 2 players. We have here Sergio Aguero, we have Leo Messi, we have Cristiano Ronaldo. In this analysis, I'm going to consider that Liverpool couldn't have signed them, so I'm not going to consider them in the candidate list. I'm going to try and keep it a bit realistic, although there will be some that you'll agree that they aren't realistic. So this is the candidates that I'm going to analyze. There's 6 people there. So there's Diego Costa, Ciro Immobile, Kevin Gameiro, Lewandowski, Domenico Berardi, and Carlos Tevez. So those are the 6 players, okay? These players we're going to look at. We already know that they are quite counter-attacking, so we like that because we want that. They scored a lot of goals per 90 minutes last season. That is good, but I'm sure many of you will be aware that this might not be the most reliable metric, but obviously you want them to be high on that. So let's look at these 6 players, looking at more information, looking at the playing styles. Before we do that, though, let's first take a quick look at Suarez and Sturridge. So this is Suarez, and this is a similar build to what we saw before, but this time it's focused on the individual. But the position of the styles is similar to what we saw in the teams, is that instead of direct play, we have his involvement in direct play in the sense of direct play passes received. So does he receive a lot of direct play passes, a lot of long passes from behind? In the other ones, it's the same. So in counter-attack, we're measuring counter-attacking distance. We've discussed already. Maintenance, build-up, and sustained threat. Remember those long possessions in the different areas of the pitch. What we're measuring is the number of touches of the ball and passes that he does in those different areas during those phases. Okay? Fast possessions. You remember fast possession was based on individual fast possessions. So this is simply the number of fast possessions they had. Crosses. So this relates to crossing. How many crosses did he receive last season? High press regain. So how many times did he regain the ball through high pressure? So high up the pitch. And these two here we're going to discuss in depth later on. For now, ball circulation is a ranking of how dangerous the passing of this player is. If you have a high value, that means you cause a lot of dangers with your passes. You generate a lot of shots through your passing, shots that other people take. This other rating is to do with shot generation, and it's basically how many shots do you take, but not only that, where do you take them from, how dangerous they are. So this is the danger you generate through shots, the danger you generate through passes. And like before, we're using a reference line here because each of these variables happens with different frequency. You obviously don't shoot as much as you, for example, touch the ball in maintenance phases. So what we're doing is we're using the reference of those 232 players that we saw in the map. Those will be our baseline, and we'll compare Suarez against that in this case. So just to give a brief example, Suarez covered 48% more counter-attack distance than the average striker in the 5 leagues last season. This is how it looks. And to quickly comment, you can see how complete a profile he gives. So he is very counter-attacking, which we knew already, but he also takes a lot of touches and passes during these phases, maintenance, build-up, sustained threat, which is something that, although we weren't looking at it for it initially, well, I guess it doesn't hurt that this striker does it. And he is also quite fast on the ball. He's not someone that you would basically look for if you wanted to do a lot of crossing, in principle, and the same for direct play. Now let's look at Sturridge. Sturridge is similar, and we know that from before in that he covers a lot of distance in counter-attacking. He is also quite dangerous in his shooting, but his involvement in the other offensive styles is not as complete as Suarez. So, for example, in the long possessions in the dangerous area, in the build-up area, and in the final third, the sustained threat, he is not as present as Suarez is. And in terms of crossing and direct play, he's similar to Suarez. So we're now going to use this same approach with the 6 guys that I identify, and I'll have to go through these quickly. This is Diego Costa's season in Atletico, his last season. completely different type of player, a bit counter-attacking, well, quite a bit actually, 22% over the average, but he's also a quite direct striker, so people look for him in long passes, and he's also quite good at receiving crosses. Let's look now at Ciro Immobile. He has a high value of counter-attacker because we picked him because of that, but he's not completing the other ones. So he's a bit more like Sturridge as he is than Suarez, but he's still not as good as any of them. What else? We have Kevin Gameiro, slightly older, 27-year-old, and we know he's high on counter-attack because we picked him for that. He's quite dangerous on the shooting, but again, lacks a bit of the other ones. And it's up to us, for us to decide whether we consider this important or not. Let's quickly look at the others. Robert Lewandowski, different profile again. He is above the average in counter-attack, but not for the difference is not quite as big. He's quite dangerous on the shooting. He's the most dangerous of them all, and he's good at well, finding the end of crosses, I guess. Let's look at the next one, Domenico Berardi, really young striker, really promising. A bit over the average on counter-attack, but in terms of the other styles, well, he's very good at the high press apparently, so he recovers a lot of balls from there. But in terms of the other styles, he's not the most contributing player. And lastly, and this is very interesting, he's Carlos Tevez. We all know him very well. He's a bit older. He's a bit older than the other guys, but look at the profile, how interesting it is. And it looks quite a bit like the Suarez profile, doesn't it? Not quite as high on the counter-attack, but the others, look at his involvement in the build-up, sustained threat, and fast tempo, really high. So if we wanted to keep that in the team, which we may want, we may not want, we might want to go for him if age doesn't matter, or there are obviously other considerations. But this is, look at this slide just quickly. Look at the different shapes of those radars. They are completely different. So we can't just pick a striker looking at number of shots made, number of goals scored, because that wouldn't mean that when we bring him over, he's going to fit well in our team. Whereas if we look at the playing style, we can start to do that. We can start going on that route. And now we can take a look at who they eventually sign, which, as we know, is Balotelli. So he sits there in the chart, so he's not far away from the candidate list. In terms of counter-attacking distance, he's basically in the average, so that's not bad. And in terms of goals per 90 minutes, he's quite high, actually. If you go back to the previous view, he's on the top third of the players. So in paper, he's not bad. Now, in terms of the counter-attacking, assuming that we wanted to keep the counter-attacking importance in our team, we wouldn't necessarily have picked him, but that's not to say he doesn't have any other interesting features. This is his season in Milan. This is his season now in Liverpool. Obviously, he hasn't played that many minutes, so he hasn't even played those 900 minutes that we were talking about, at least in the 28th week. So he might have now, I'm not sure. But this is his profile, so he hasn't done a lot of counter-attacking, as we know, because he didn't show up in the previous plots. And he's been involved in the maintenance, which is not necessarily what we want from him. He hasn't been that involved in the other phases. He's been quite dangerous at generating chances, though, which is something good for him. So he's generated a lot of dangerous shots. What he hasn't done is making, well, basically converting them. So the difference between actual goals and expected goals is not great for him, as we'll see later. So again, this was just to give you a picture of how we can look at this playing style information to kind of start to think whether this player will fit well or bad in our team.